Hello there. I believe we're live. I would try to check Twitter, but I don't think Twitter's up. It just says welcome to X. So hopefully it's streaming there. I probably should have thought of that, considering most of my views come from X. Well, good morning. It is about 7:35 here in California time, and I'm setting up to read some more King of Elfland's Daughter. This is been meaning to get back, and first read of the year. Oh my goodness. Let's see if we can't remember maybe exactly where I left off, because it has been a minute. I know that, to start with, Prince Alveric, at the behest of his father, went to go marry the King of Elfland's daughter. So he enlisted the help of a witch named Zarundarel to forge him a sword made from runes of thunder. And she did, and this great sword was magical in a way that could withstand the parries and strikes of Elfkind. And so with that in mind, he goes in, breaches the barrier of twilight, fights off some elven warriors, and steals away the King of Elfland's daughter, named Lyrazel. So they make it back and live happily ever after. Just kidding. They have a child who they name Orion because Lyrazel enjoys the stars, thanks the stars. And because she's elf-kind and unable to really grasp the religious customs of humanity, there's some tension there. And she eventually leaves by way of the King of Elfland's rune. He sends a rune via a troll to summon her back, or either summon her back or summon her away. I'm not sure exactly which, but she opens the scroll, the rune, at her lowest point and just fades away, disappears into the autumn winds and is blown away. And her son Orion takes to hunting, and her husband, Alveric, tries to find her. He tries to find Elfland, but it has ebbed away. It has gone from where he originally went. And so then he built a party. He came back, formed a party of adventurers to go see if he can't find Elfland, the Elf King, and Lyrazel. And I believe that's kind of where we left off. And I'm not exactly sure what happened, and I'm very curious to see. And it sounds like this next chapter we're in is going to reveal that information to us. Let me just pop up this screen here of the book we're reading. You can see the edition I'm reading from, which is this, what is it? What edition? A Del Rey book. Del Rey book, and on the back it's Ballantine books. Oh, so Del Rey Ballantine. This edition is what I'm reading from if you wish to follow along. We are in chapter 15, XV, The Retreat of the Elf King, page 99. a little shy of halfway done with the book. Congratulations all. We've made it almost halfway. I'm going to take a sip of some coffee, get kind of in the zone, and we're going to start reading. Remember, this isn't really a performance. If I think to do voices, I will. They're not going to be consistent, and it's not really an audio book. It's more of a book club sort of situation. I'm reading. I will stop where things interest me, and yeah, we'll go from there. Get those vocal cords all primed with the big old coffee, and I think we can go. And if you think of it, I'm curious. I've been doing these in the morning to stall a little further, and morning is fine, but in the morning I'm still waking up. My vocal cords are still waking up. If evening streams are better for these, let me know. Maybe in response in a comment or whatever, and we can go from there. I don't really mind doing them in the evening. It's just I have the most time in the morning. But I have stalled long enough. We gotta find out what happens to Lyrazel and the Elf King. So let us read The King of Elfland's Daughter, Chapter 15, The Retreat of the Elf King. When Lyrazel blew away, with the splendid leaves they dropped, one by one, from their dance in the gleaming air, and ran on over fields for a while, and then gathered by hedgerows and rested. But earth that pulls all things down had no hold on her, for the rune of the King of Elfland had crossed its borders, calling her home. She rode carelessly, the great northwest wind, looking down idly on the fields we know, as she swept over them homewards. No grip had earth on her any longer, for with her weight, which is where earth holds us, were gone all her earthly cares. She saw without grief old friends wherein she and Alveric walked once. They drifted by. She saw the houses of men. These also passed, and deep and dense and heavy with color, she saw the border of Elfland. A last cry, earth called to her with many voices, a child shouting, rooks cawing, the dull lowing of cows, a slow cart heaving home. Then she was into the dense barrier of twilight, and all earth sounds dimmed suddenly. She was she was through it, and they ceased. Like a tired horse falling dead, our northwest wind dropped at the frontier, for no winds blow in Elfland that roam over the fields we know. And Lyrazel slanted slowly onward and down, till her feet were back again on the magical soil of her home. She saw full fair the peaks of the Elfin mountains, and dark underneath them the forest that guarded the Elf King's throne. Above this forest were glimmering even now great spires in the elfin morning, which glows with more sparkling splendor than do our most dewy dawns, and never passes away. Over the elfin land they passed, with her light feet touching the grasses as thistledown touches them when it comes down to them and brushes their crests, while a languid wind rolls it slowly over the fields we know, and all the elvish and fantastic things, and the curious aspect of the land, and the odd flowers, and the haunted trees, and the ominous boding of magic that hung in the air, were all so full of memories of her home that she flung her arms about the first gnarled gnome-like trunk, and kissed its wrinkled bark. And so she came to the enchanted wood, and the sinister pines that guarded it, with the watchful ivy leaning over their branches, bowed to Lyrazel as she passed. Not a wonder in that wood, not a grim hint of magic, but brought back the past to her as though it had scarcely gone. It was, she felt, but yesterday morning that she had gone away, and it was yesterday morning still, as she passed through the wood, the gashes of Alveric's sword were yet fresh and white on the trees. And now a light began to glow through the wood, then a flash upon flash of colors, and she knew they shone from the glory and splendor of flowers that girdled the lawns of her father. To these she came again, and her faint footprints that she had made as she left her father's palace, and wondered to see Alveric there, were not yet gone from the bended grass and spider webs in the dew. There the great flowers glowed in the elfin light, while beyond them were twinkled and flashed, with the portal, through which she had left it, still open wide to the lawns, the palace that may not be told of, but only in song. Thither Lyrazel returned, and the Elf King, who heard by magic the tread of her soundless feet, was before his door to meet her. His great beard almost hid her as they embraced. Interesting. His great beard. I wouldn't expect an elf of any kind to have beard. An interesting visual. His great beard almost hid her as they embraced. He had sorrowed for her long through that elfin morning. He had wondered despite his wisdom. He had feared for all his runes. He had yet yearned for her as human hearts may yearn, for all that he was of magic stock dwelling beyond our fields. And now she was home again, and the elfin morning brightened over leagues of Elfland, with the old Elf King's joy, and even a glow was seen upon the slopes of the elfin mountains. It's kind of blowing my mind right now, actually, that it seems like, as I'm reading this, that to the King of Elfland, Lyrazel has been gone for an afternoon. It's been an afternoon jaunt. What did you do this afternoon, daughter? Oh, nothing, Papa. I went to Human Land. sired a child with a man, and we grew together for many years." "Oh, that's all?" And through the flashing glimmer of the vast doorway they passed into the palace once more. The knight of the Elf King's guard saluted with his sword as they went, but dared not turn his head after Lyrazel's beauty. They came again to the hall of the Elf King's throne, which was made of rainbows and ice, and the great king seated himself and took Lyrazel on his knee, and a calm came down upon Elfland. and for a, and for long through the for long through the endless elfin morning, nothing troubled that calm. Lyrazel rested at the cares of earth, and Lyrazel rested after the cares of earth. The Elf King sat there keeping the deep content in his heart. The knight of the guard remained at the salute, his sword's point downward still. The palace glowed and shone. It was like a scene in some deep pool beyond the sound of a city, with green reeds and gleaming fishes and myriads of tiny shells, all shining in the twilight on deep water, which nothing has disturbed through all the long summer's day. And thus they rested beyond the fret of time, and the hours rested around them, as the little leaping waves of a cataract rest when the ice calms the stream. The serene blue peaks of the elfin mountains above them stood like unchanging dreams. Then, like the noise of some city heard amongst the birds in the woods, like a sob heard amongst children that are all met to rejoice, like laughter amongst a company that weep, like a shrill wind in orchards among the early blossom, like a wolf coming over the downs where the sheep are asleep, there came a feeling into the Elf King's mood that one was coming towards them across the fields of earth. It was Alvric with his sword of thunderbolt iron, which somehow the old king sensed by its flavor of magic. Then the Elf King rose and put his left arm about his daughter, and raised his right to make a mighty enchantment, standing up before his shining throne, which is the very center of Elfland. And with clear resonance deep down in his throat, he chaunted a rhythmic spell, all made of words that Lyrazel never had heard before, some age-old incantation, calling Elfland away, drawing it further from earth. And the marvelous flowers heard as their petals drank in the music, and the deep notes flooded the lawns, and all the palace thrilled and quivered with brighter colors, and a charm went over the plain as far as the frontier of twilight, and a trembling went through the enchanted wood. Still the Elf King chaunted on. The ringing ominous notes came now to the elfin mountains, and all their line of peaks quivered as hills in haze, when the heat of summer beats up from the moors, and visibly dances in the air. All Elfland heard, all Elfland obeyed that spell. And now the king and his daughter drifted away as the smoke of the nomads drifts over the Sahara, away from their camel's hair tents, as dreams drift away at dawn, as clouds over the sunset, and like the wind with the smoke, night with the dreams, warmth with the sunset, all Elfland drifted with them. All Elfland drifted with them and left the desolate plain, the dreary deserted region, the unenchanted land. So swiftly that spell was uttered, so suddenly Elfland obeyed, that many a little song, old memory, garden or may tree of remembered years, was swept but a little way by the drift and heave of Elfland, swaying too slowly eastwards till the elfin lawns were gone, and the barrier of twilight heaved over them and left them among the rocks. And whither Elfland went, I cannot say, nor even whether it followed the curve of the earth or drifted beyond our rocks out into twilight. There had been an enchantment near to our fields, and now there was none. Wherever it went, it was far. Then the Elf King ceased to chaunt, and all was accomplished, as slightly as, in a moment that none can determine, the long layers over the sunset turned from gold to pink, or from a glowing pink to a listless unlit color. All Elfland left the edges of those fields by which its wonder had lurked for long ages of men, and was away now whither I know not. I need one bit of a break here, if you'll bear with me. See, a couple people are watching. Cheers to you all. Cheers to both of you. And the Elf King seated himself again on his throne of mist and ice, in which charmed rainbows were, and took Lyrazel his daughter again on his knee, and the calm that his chaunting had broken came back heavy and deep over Elfland. Heavy and deep it fell on the lawns, heavy and deep on the flowers. Each dazzling blade of grass was still in its little curve, as though nature, in a moment of mourning, said, "Hush, at the sudden end of the world. And the flowers dreamed on in their beauty, immune from the autumn or wind. Far over the moors of the trolls slept the calm of the king of Elfland, where the smoke from their queer habitations hung, stilled in the air. Bear with me. And in the forest wherein it quieted the trembling of myriads of petals of roses. It stilled the pools where the great lilies towered, till they and their reflections slept on in one gorgeous dream. And there below motionless fronds of dream-gripped trees, all the still water dreaming of the still air, where the hung lily leaves floated green in the calm, was the troll Luraloo, sitting up on a leaf. For thus they named the Elfland for thus they named in Elfland the troll that had gone to Earl. He sat there, gazing into the water at a certain impudent look that he had on. He gazed and he gazed and gazed. Nothing stirred, nothing changed. All things were still, reposing in the deep content of the king. In the deep content of the king. Woof! The knight of the guard brought his sword back to the carry, and afterwards stood as still at his perpetual post as some suit of armor whose owner is centuries dead. And still the king sat silent with his daughter upon his knee, his blue eyes unmoving as the pale blue peaks, which through wide windows shone from the elfin mountains. And the elf king stirred not nor changed, but held to that moment in which he had found content, and laid its influence over all his dominions, for the good and welfare of Elfland, for he had what all our troubled world with all its changes seeks, and finds so rarely and must at once cast it away. He had found content, and held it. And in that calm that settled down upon Elfland, there passed 10 years over the fields we know. Wow. Okay. I have mentioned before that I'm sad for Lyrazel's parting from Alveric. And I understand it. It's a tension of humankind and elfkind. I think the freer or the friar perhaps who had tried to wed them couldn't figure out kind of a doctrine to use, so he figured the mermaid that had eschewed her home as a sort of means of like how he could justify marrying human and elfkind together. But still, I was rooting for it. I was rooting for her to stay, for them to figure it out, for them to find some kind of, I don't know about compromise so much as understanding. I was really hoping for that. So to find her back home, makes me sad a little bit. But anyways, I digress. Chapter 16. Orion hunts the stag. There passed 10 years over the fields we know, and Orion grew and learned of the art of Oth, and had the cunning of Threll, and knew the woods and the slopes and vales of the downs, as many another boy knows how to multiply figures by other figures, or to draw the thoughts from a language not his own, and to set them down again in words of his own tongue. And little he knew of the things that ink may do, how it can mark a dead man's thought for the wonder of later years, and tell of happenings that are gone clean away, and be a voice for us out of the dark of time, and save many a fragile thing from the pounding of heavy ages, or carry to us, over the rolling centuries, even a song from lips long dead on forgotten hills. Little knew he of ink, but the touch of a rose deer feet on dry ground, gone 3 hours, was a clear path to him, and nothing went through the woods but Orion read its story. And all the sounds of the wood were as full of clear meaning to him as are to the mathematician the signs and figures he makes when he divides his millions by tens and 11s and 12s. He knew by sun and moon and wind what birds would enter the wood. He knew of the coming seasons whether they would be mild or severe, only a little later than the beasts of the woods themselves, which have not human reason or soul, and that know so much more than we. And so he grew to know the very mood of the woods, and could enter their shadowy shelter like one of the woodland beasts. And this he could do when he was barely 14 years. And many a man lives all his years and can never enter a wood without changing the whole mood of its shadowy ways. For men enter a wood perhaps with the wind behind them. They brush against branches, step on twigs, speak, smoke, or tread heavily, and jays cry out against them. Pigeons leave the trees, rabbits pad off to safety, and far more beasts than they know slip on soft feet away from their coming. But Orion moved like Threll, in shoes of deerskin, with the tread of a hunter, and none of the beasts of the woods knew when he was come. And he came to have a pile of skins like oth, that he won with his bow in the wood, and he hung great horns of stags in the hall of the castle, high up among old horns where the spider had lived for ages. And this was one of the signs whereby the people of Earl came to know him now for their lord, for no news came of Alvric. And all the old lords of Earl had been hunters of deer. And another sign was the departing of the witch Zorundarel, when she went back to her hill, and Orion lived in the castle now by himself, and she dwelt in her cottage again, where her cabbages grew on high land, near to the thunder. Thunder cabbages has just crossed my mind, and I'm amused. And all that winter Orion hunted the stags in the wood, but when spring came he put his bow away. Yet all through the season of song and flowers his thoughts were still with the chase, and he went from house to house, wherever a man had one of the long, thin dogs that hunt, and sometimes he bought the dog, and sometimes the man would promise to lend it on days of hunting. Thus Orion formed a pack of brown, long-haired hounds, and yearned for the spring and summer to go by. And one spring evening, when Orion was tending his hounds, when villagers were mostly at their doors to notice the length of the evening, there came a man up the street whom nobody knew. He came from the uplands, wrapped in the most aged of clothes, which hung to him as though they clung forever, and were somehow part of him, and yet part of the earth, for they were mellowed by the clay of the high fields to its own deep brown, and folk noticed the easy stride of a mighty walker, and a weariness in his eyes, and none knew who he was. And then a woman said, "It is Vand, that was only a lad." And they all crowded about him then, for it was indeed Vand who had left the sheep more than 10 years ago to ride with Alvric, no one in Earl knew whither. "How fares our master?" they said, and a look of weariness came in the eyes of Vand. "He follows the quest," he said. "Whither?" they asked. "To the north," he said. "He seeks for Elfland still." "Why have you left them?" they asked. "I lost the hope," he said. They questioned him no more then, for all men knew that to seek for Elfland one needed a strong hope, and without it one saw no gleam of the elfin mountains, serene with unchanging blue. And then the mother of Niv came running up. "Is it indeed Vand?" she said, and they all said, "Yes, it is Vand." And while they murmured together about Vand, and how years and wandering had changed him, she said to him, "Tell me of my son." And Vand replied, "He leads the quest. There is none whom my master trusts more." And they all wondered, and yet they had no cause for wonder, for it was a mad quest. But Niv's mother alone did not wonder. "I knew he would," she said. "I knew he would." And she was filled with great content. There are events and seasons to suit the mood of every man, though few indeed could have suited the crazed mood of Niv. Yet there came Alvric's quest of Elfland, and so Niv found his work. And talking in the late evening with Vand, the folk of Earl heard tales of many camps, many marches, a tale of profitless wandering where Alvric haunted horizons year after year like a ghost. And sometimes out of Vand's sadness that had come from those pointless years, a smile would shine as he told of some foolish happening that had taken place in the camp. But all was told by one that had lost hope in the quest. This was not the way to tell of it, not with doubts, not with smiles. For such a quest may only be told of by those who are fired by its glory. From the mad brain of Niv or the moonstruck wits of Zend, we might have news of that quest which could light our minds with some gleam of its meaning, but never from the story, be it made out of facts or scoffs, told by one whom the quest itself was able to lure no longer. The stars stole out, and still Vand was telling his stories, and one by one the people went back to their houses, caring to hear no more of the hopeless quest. Had the tale been told by one who clung yet to the faith that still was leading Alvric's wanderings on, the stars would have weakened before those folk left to the teller. The sky would have brightened so widely before they left him that one would have said at last, "Why, it is morning!" Not till then would they have gone. And the next day Vand went back to the downs and the sheep, and troubled himself with romantic quests no more. Oh my goodness. Okay, so that really fills me with a deep, profound sadness. And the next day Vand went back to the downs and sheep, and troubled himself with romantic quests no more. This is, I I don't want it to seem like a performative thing necessarily, but reading this blind is giving me everything kind of in the moment as it's hitting me, and a line like that is really tough. Because we all have kind of a sense of adventure, don't we? And to have it be ended for one such as this is really rough. But it makes Alvaric's unwavering nature both something to be lauded, but also something very bittersweet. He has not achieved his end. He's been gone forever, for 10 years to the people. And yet, there is still no Elfland. Will he wander forever? I hope not. I hope he's reconciled with Lyrazel. I mean, that's what I hope. Going into this, I don't know what happens next, but I do hope he finds it. And I hope it's only Vand who has forsaken the way. And during that spring, men spoke of Alvric again, wondering a while at his quest, speaking a while of Lyrazel, and guessing where she had gone, and guessing why, and where they could not guess, telling some tale to explain all, which went from mouth to mouth till they came to believe it. And spring went by, and they forgot Alvric, and obeyed the will of Orion. And then one day, as Orion was waiting for the summer to go by, with his heart on frosty days, and his dreams with his hounds on the uplands, Rannoch the lover came over the downs by the path by which Van had come, and walked down into Earl. Rannoch, with his heart free at last, with all his melancholy gone. Rannoch without woe, careless, carefree, content, looking only for the rest, after his long wandering, sighing no more. And nothing but this would have made Viria care to have him, the girl he had sought once. So the end of this was that she married him, and he too went roaming no more on fantastic quests. Oh my goodness! And though some looked to the uplands through many an evening, till the long days wore away and a strange wind touched the leaves, and some peered over the further curves of the downs, yet they saw none more of the followers of Alvaric's quest coming back to the path, by the path that Vand and Rannoch had trod. And by the time that the leaves were wonder of scarlet, and gold men spoke no more of Alvric, but obeyed Orion his son. And in this season Orion arose one day before dawn, and took his horn and his bow, and went to his hounds, who wondered to hear his step before light was come. They heard it all in their sleep, and awoke and clamoured to him. And he loosed them and calmed them, and led them away to the downs. And to the lonely magnificence of the downs they came when stags are feeding on dewy grasses, before men are awake. All in the wild wet morning they ran over the gleaming slopes, Orion and his hounds, all rejoicing together. And the scent of the thyme came heavy with the air that Orion breathed, as he trod its wide patches, blooming late in the year. To the hounds there came all the wandering scents of the morning, and what wild creatures had met on the hill in the dark, and what had crossed its going upon their journeys, and whither all had gone, when the day grew bright, bringing the threat of man. Orion guessed and wondered. But to the hounds all was clear, and some of the scents they noted with careful noses, and some they scorned, and for one they sought in vain, for the great red deer were not on the downs that morning. And Orion led them far from the vale of Earl, but saw no stag that day, and never a wind brought the scent that the anxious hounds were seeking, nor could they find it hidden in any grass or leaves. And evening came on him, bringing his hounds home, calling on strangers with his horn, while the sun turned huge and scarlet, and fainter than the echoes of his horn, and far beyond downs and mists, but clear each silver note. He heard the elfin horns that called to him always at evening. Huh. If you're watching this and you have read this, pardon me, but one thing, I'm stopping this more frequently just because I'm intrigued by what's going on here. Orion is hearing the elfin horns, despite Elfland having ebbed away. Alvric's out there to the north, journeying, and has been journeying for 10 years and has heard nothing. Was his sin so great? Was his transgression so deep? I mean, I guess so. He stole Lyrazel away. Huh. With the great comradeship of a common weariness, he and his hounds came home dark in the starlight. The windows of Earl at last flashed to them the glow of their welcome. Hounds came to their kennels and ate, and lay down to contented sleep. Orion went to his castle. He too ate, and afterwards sat thinking of the downs, and his hounds, and the day, his mind lulled by fatigue to that point at which it rests beyond care. And many a day passed thus. And then one dewy morning, coming over a ridge of the downs, they saw a stag below them feeding late when all the rest were gone. The hounds all broke into one joyous cry. The heavy stag moved nimbly over the grass. Orion shot an arrow and missed. All these things happened in a moment. And then the hounds streamed away, and the wind went over the backs of them with a ripple. And the stag went away as though every one of his feet were on little dancing springs. And at first the hounds were swifter than Orion. But he was as tireless as they, and by taking sometimes shorter ways than theirs, he stayed near them till they came to a stream, and faltered, and began to need the help of human reason. And such help as human reason can give in such a manner Orion gave them, and soon they were on again. And the morning passed as they went from hill to hill, and they had not seen the stag a second time. And the afternoon wore away, and still the hounds followed every step of the stag with a skill as strange as magic. And towards the evening Orion saw him, going slowly along the slope of a hill, over coarse grass that was shining in the rays of the low sun. He cheered on his hounds, and they ran him over 3 more small valleys. But down at the bottom of the third, he turned around amongst the pebbles of the stream, and waited there for the hounds. And they came baying round him, watching his low antlers. And there they tore him down and killed him at sunset, and Orion wound his horn with a great joy in his heart. He wanted no more than this, and with a note like that of joy, as though they also rejoiced, or mocked his rejoicing, over the hills that he knew not, perhaps from the far side of the sunset, the horns of Elfland answered. Okay, so clearly Orion has some connection. Obviously through being born of both Lyrazel and Alveric, the human and elf kind, in wedded. It leaves me very curious and full of pause. The next chapter, chapter 17, the unicorn comes in the starlight, page 113. And the winter came and whitened the roofs of Earl, and all the forests and uplands. And when Orion took his hounds afield in the morning, the world lay like a book that was newly written by life, for all the story of the night before lay in long lines in the snow. Here the fox had gone, and there the badger, and here the red deer had gone out of the woods. The tracks led over the downs and disappeared from sight, as the deeds of statesmen, soldiers, courtiers, politicians appear and disappear on the pages of history. Even the birds had their record on those white downs, where the eye could follow each step of their treble claws, till suddenly on each side of the track would appear 3 little scars, where the tips of their longest feathers had flicked the snow, and there the track faded utterly. They were like some popular cry, some vehement fancy that comes down on a page of history for a day and passes, leaving no other record at all except those lines on one page. And amongst all these records left the story of night. Orion would choose the track of some great stag not too long gone, and would follow with his hounds away over the downs until even the sound of his horn could be heard, no longer an earl. And over the ridge with his hounds, he and they all black against red remnants of sunset, the folks of Earl would see him coming home, and often it was not until all the stars were glowing through the frost. Often the skin of a red deer hung over his shoulders, and the huge horns bobbed and nodded above his head. And at this time there met one day in the forge of Gnarl, all unknown to Orion, the men of the Parliament of Earl. They met after sunset when all were home from their work, and gravely Gnarl handed to each the mead that was brewed from the clover honey, and when all were come they sat silent. Excuse me. And then Gnarl broke the silence, saying that Alveric ruled over Earl no more, and that his son was the Lord of Earl, and telling again how once they had hoped for a magic lord to rule over the valley and to make it famous, and saying that this should be he. And where now, he said, is the magic for which we hoped? For he hunts the deer as all his forefathers hunted, and nothing of magic has touched him from over there. And there is no new thing. And Oth stood up to defend him. He is as fleet as his hounds, he said, and hunts from dawn to sunset, and crosses the furthest downs, and comes home untired. It is but youth, said Guthwic, And so all said but Threll. And Threll stood up and said, "He has a knowledge of the ways of the woods, and the lore of the beasts beyond the learnings of man." "You taught him," said Guhik. "There is no magic here." "Nothing of this," said Gnarl, "is from over there." Thus they argued a while, lamenting the loss of the magic for which they had hoped. For never a valley but history touches it once. Never a village but once its name is a while on the lips of men. Only the village of Earl was utterly unrecorded. Never a century knew it beyond the round of its downs. And now all their plans seemed lost, which they made so long ago, and they saw no hope except in the mead that was brewed from the clover honey. To this they turned in silence. Now it was a goodly brew. And in a while new plans flashed clear in their minds, new schemes, new devices, and debates in the Parliament of Earl flowed proudly on, and they would have made a plan and a policy, but Oth rose from his seat. There was in a flint-built house in the village of Earl an ancient chronicle, a volume bound in leather, and in it, at a certain seasons, folk wrote all manner of things. The wisdom of farmers concerning the time to sow, the wisdom of hunters concerning the tracking of stags, and the wisdom of prophets that told of the ways of of the ways of earth. From this Oth quoted now 2 lines that he remembered on one of the aged pages, and all the rest of that page told of hoeing. These lines he said to the Parliament of Earl, as they sat with the mead before them at their tables. "Hooded and veiled with their night-like tresses, the fates shall bring what no prophet guesses." And then they planned no more, for either their minds were calmed by a certain awe that they seemed to find in the lines, or it may be the mead was stronger than anything written in books. However it be, they sat in silence over their mead, and in the early starlight, while the west still glowed, they passed away from Gnarl's house back to their own homes, grumbling as they went that they had no magic lord to rule over Earl, and yearning for magic to save from oblivion the village and the valley they loved. They parted one by one as they came to their houses, and 3 or 4 that dwelt near the end of the village on the side that was under the downs were not yet come to their doors when, white and clear in the starlight and what remained of the gloaming, they saw hard-pressed and wearied a hunted unicorn coming across the downs. They stopped and gazed and shaded their eyes and stroked their beards and wondered. And still it was a white unicorn, galloping wearily. And then they heard, drawing near, the cry of Orion's hounds. So this is a land and a people who want magic. If you're following along from here and haven't read previous, the inciting incident of this was this Parliament of Earl coming to the king of the lands we know and saying, "We want magic. We want some new thing, something of renown." And that's why he sends Alveric out to go capture Lyrazel, bring her home, marry her, and things like that. So they're still on that. But why don't they see the extra magic from Orion? There's something. I mean, there is a logic to some elvish influence in his steps and his quality of the hunt. But maybe this unicorn will do something. I don't know. Let's continue further. Chapter 18. Okay, just making sure. Keeping track of time. Sorry, I gotta have one more. A lot to think about here. I do wonder if Orion's going to be able to hunt Elfland out. That maybe his connection, the horns he hears, his knowledge of the woods can help him bypass whatever this ebb of Elfland might be. I don't know. I suppose I should just continue and find out, right? Chapter 18. The Grey Tent in the Evening. On the day that the hunted unicorn crossed the valley of Earl, Alveric had wandered for over 11 years. For more than 10 years, a company of 6, they went by the backs of the houses, by the edge of the fields, we know, and camped at evenings with their queer material hung grayly on poles. And whether or not the strange romance of their quest mirrored itself in all the things about them, those camps of theirs seemed always the strangest thing in the landscape. And as evening grew grayer around them, their romance and mystery grew. and for all the vehemence of Alvric's ambition, they traveled leisurely and lazily. Sometimes in a pleasant camp they stayed for 3 days, then they went strolling on. 9 or 10 miles they would march, and then they would camp again. Some day, Alvric felt sure in his heart, they would see that border of twilight. Some day they would enter Elfland. And in Elfland he knew that time was not as here. He would meet Lyrazel, unaged in Elfland, with never one smile lost to the raging years, never a furrow worn by the ruin of time. This was his hope, and it led his queer company on from camp to camp, and cheered them round the fire in the lonely evenings, and brought them far to the north, travelling all along the edge of the fields we know, where all men's faces turned the other way, and the 6 wanderers went unseen and unheeded. Only the mind of Van hung back from their hope, and more every year his reason denied the lure that was leading the rest. And then one day he lost his faith in Elfland. After that he only followed until a day when the wind was full of rain, and all were cold and wet, and the horses weary. He left them then. And Rannoch followed because he had no hope in his heart, and wished to wander from sorrow, until one day when all the blackbirds were singing in trees of the fields we know, and his hopelessness left him in the glittering sunshine, and he thought of the cozy homes and haunts of men, and soon he too passed out of the camp one evening, and set off for the pleasant lands. And now the 4 that were left were all of one mind, and under the wet coarse cloth that they hung on poles there was a deep content in the evenings. For Alvric clung to his hope with all the strength of his race, that had once won Earl in old battles, and held it for centuries long, and in the vacant minds of Niv and Zend this idea grew strong and big, like some rare flower that a gardener may plant by chance in a wild, untended place. And Thiel sung of the hope, and all his wild fancies that roamed after song decked Alvric's quest with more and more glamour, so all were of one mind. And greater quests, whether mad or sane, have prospered when this was so, and greater quests have failed when it was otherwise. They had gone northwards for years along the backs of those houses, and then one day they would turn eastwards, wherever a certain look in the sky or touch of weirdness at evening, or a mere prophecy of Niv seemed to suggest a proximity of Elfland. Upon such occasions they would travel over the rocks that for all those years lay bordering the fields we know, until Alvric saw that provisions for men and horses would barely bring them back to the houses of men. Then he would turn again, but Niv would have led them still onwards over the rocks, for his enthusiasm grew as they went, and Thiel sang to them prophesying success, and Zend would say that he saw the peaks and the spires of Elfland. Only Alvric was wise. And so they would come to the houses of men again, and buy more provisions, and Niv and Zend and Thiel would babble of the quest, pouring out the enthusiasm that burned in their hearts, but Alvric did not speak of it, for he had learned that men in those fields neither speak of nor look toward Elfland, though he had not learned why. Soon they were on again, and the folk that had sold them the produce of the fields we know gazed curiously after them as they went, as though they thought that from madness alone, or from dreams inspired by the moon, came all the talk they had heard from Niv and Zend and Thiel. Thus they always travelled on, always seeking new points from which to discover Elfland, and on the left of them blew scents from the fields we know, the scent of lilac from cottage gardens in May, and then the scent of the white thorn, and then of roses, till all the air was heavy with new-mown hay. They heard the low of cattle away on their left, heard human voices, heard partridges calling, heard all the sounds that go up from the happy farms, and on their right was always the desolate land, always the rocks, and never grass nor a flower. They had the companionship of men no more. And yet they could not find Elfland. In such a case they needed the songs of Thiel and the sure hope of Niv. And the talk of Alvric's quest spread through the land and overtook his wanderings, till all men that he passed by knew his story, and from some he had the contempt that some men give to those who dedicate all their days to a quest, and from others he had honor, but all he asked for was provender, and this he bought when they brought it. So they went on. Like legendary things they passed along the backs of the houses, putting up their grey shapeless tents in the grey evenings. They came as quietly as rain, and went away like mists drifting. There were jests about them, and the songs outlasted the jests. At last they became a legend, which haunted those farms forever. They were spoken of when men told of hopeless quests, and held up to laughter or glory, whichever men had to give. And all the while the king of Elfland watched, for he knew by magic when Alvric's sword drew near, It had troubled his kingdom once. Aha! Sorry. I was wondering. Okay, so I thought it occurred to me between the readings that perhaps maybe this thing is just out of reach and always moving away from Alveric. Like, can't touch me, can't touch me. All the while the king of Elfland watched, for he knew by magic when Alveric's sword drew near, it had troubled his kingdom once, and the king of Elfland knew well the flavor of the thunderbolt iron when he felt it loom on the air. From this he had withdrawn his frontiers far, leaving all that ragged land deserted of Elfland, and though he knew not the length of human journeys, he had left a space that to cross would weary the comet, and rightly deemed himself safe. But when Alfric with his sword was far to the north, the Elf King loosened the grip with which he had withdrawn Elfland, as the moon had... Or wait, maybe I'm... Hold on. Maybe he wasn't pulling it back. So that's an interesting visual. So he's pulled it back, and he's actually holding it back. It seems like he's holding it back like a curtain. Sort of like that Elfland will land where it may, like pouring a sauce on a plate. And he's just scooping it back with a knife or a spoon or something. He had left a space that to cross would weary the comet. That's also very colorful too. He left a space that to cross would weary the comet, and rightly deemed himself safe. But when Alfric with his sword was far to the north, the Elf King loosened his grip with which he had withdrawn Elfland, as the moon that withdraws the tides lets it flow back again. Aha, yeah, okay. And Elfland came racing back as the tide over flat sands. With a long ribbon of twilight at its edge, it floated back over the waste of rocks. With old songs it came, with old dreams and with old voices. And in a while the frontier of twilight lay flashing and glimmering, near the fields we know, like an endless summer evening that lingered on out of the golden age. But bleak and far to the north, where Alveric wandered, the limitless rocks still heaped the desolate land. Only to fields from which he had his sword and his adventurous band were remotely gone, that mighty inlet of Elfland came lapping back. Huh, okay, so it sounds like what he's doing is he's kind of scooping it along, clearing that path, keeping it away from Alveric at all points, but then letting it flow back where it needs to be. So then is everyone... Oh, fascinating. So that close again to the leather worker's cottage and to the farms of his neighbors, a bare 3 fields away lay that land that was heaped and piled with all the wonder for which poets seek so hard, the very treasury of all romantic things. And the elfin mountains gazed over the border serenely, as though their pale blue peaks had never moved. And here the unicorns fed along the border, as it was their custom to do, feeding sometimes in Elfland, which is the home of all fabulous things, cropping lilies below the slopes of the elfin mountains, and sometimes slipping through the border of twilight at evening, when all our fields are still, to feed upon earthly grass. It is because of this craving for earthly grass that comes on them now and then, as the red deer in Highland mountains crave once a year for the sea, that fabulous though they are on account of their birth in Elfland, their existence is nevertheless known among men. The fox, which is born in our fields, also crosses the frontier, going into the border of twilight at certain seasons. It is thence that he gets the romance with which he comes back to our fields. He also is fabulous, but only in Elfland, as the unicorns are fabulous here. And seldom the folk on those farms saw the unicorns, even dim in the gloaming, for their faces were turned forever away from Elfland. The wonder, the beauty, and the glamour of the story of Elfland were for minds that had leisure to care for such things as these, but the crops needed these men, and the beasts that were not fabulous, and the thatch, and the hedges, and the thousand things. Barely at the end of each year they won their fight against winter. They knew well that if they let a thought of theirs turn but for a moment towards Elfland, its glory would grip them soon and take all their leisure away, and there would be no time left to mend, thatch, or hedge, or to plough the fields we know. But Orion, lured by the sound of the horns that blew from Elfland at evening, and that some elvish attuning of his ears to magical things caused him, alone in those fields to hear, came with his hounds to a field across which ran the frontier of twilight, and found the unicorns there late on an evening, and slipping along a hedge of the little field with his hounds padding behind him, he came between a unicorn and the frontier and cut it off from Elfland. This was the unicorn that was flashing neck with This was the unicorn that, with flashing neck, covered with flecks of foam that shone silvery in the starlight, panting, harried, and weary, came across the valley of Earl, like an inspiration, like a new dynasty to accustom weary land, like news of a happier continent, found far off by suddenly returning seafaring men. So there's some, okay, that's some interesting things here. So that the kind of ebbing and flowing, the continual ebbing and flowing of Elfland is continually stymieing Alveric and his men. So they are set at odds by the Elf King because of that sword. He can sense that sword, which, if you'll remember, in the previous, very like I think first reading, Alveric takes the Thunder Sword, the Thunder Rune Sword, into Elfland, strikes down the captain of the guard before he takes Lyrazel with him, and it is that same guard, that same captain of the guard, that same, I think maybe it's the first soldier, the king raises back up. So then that would explain why Orion hears it. I'm curious to see if he actually takes the bait and goes in, because there's also that factor that we're still like in the same afternoon of Elfland, and the timey-wiminess of this is really fascinating. I don't know if I'm going to read any more today, though. I think we're nearing an hour. It's not quite nearly as long as I'd hoped, but I have work to do, things to take care of, and things to plan. So where we are for next time, chapter 19, 12 Old Men Without Magic. There's a lot to take in here, and every section reading has been really good, really good. I kind of love this book. Like, I really enjoyed my read of Frankenstein, and I love to death Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. But this is just stellar. I like the language. I like how it is written. I love the style in which it is written, in terms of fairy tale, or even, just it has a fairy tale feel to it, but also reads almost matter-of-factly at times, of like, and thus this happened, and then this was the result, and in this way this thing transpired, and it gives it an old feel. And I mean, if you're looking on the back here, or the front, sorry, copyright 1924, Lord Dunsany, renewed in 51. So this is an older book as well, but it feels of an older kind, of a fantasy long ago. It's hard not to be inspired and charged with imagination from a book like this, and it's giving me a lot more for tabletop to bring together in terms of how to play elf kind, because elves are just Legolas, but with an extra smirk or two. No, these are people wholly different and wholly fairy tale, and they almost can't do things in a way that makes sense to humans, that stymie those of the lawful element. I don't know. It makes me want to draw up elf characters, fully elf characters, in any edition of D&D that I play, in any fantasy, and just try and play through what that means, to have sort of a sense of, no, like, time doesn't matter. There's nothing in the confines of linear time that really matter all that much, and to be so foreign to human customs. Very fascinating. I do not regret reading this at all, and I appreciate the recommendation from both Appendix N and some other friends. I feel like a few of the people I follow on YouTube and Twitter, like Dundermoose, Alchemic Raker, Scudder from Mike, I think a few of them, I feel like among all them and others, this recommendation has come up. This has come up many times, and it's just so good. So good. But I'm going to leave it here. And for those who are watching in the moment, I appreciate your number, you being here, you just sitting and enjoying this. But I would offer, don't feel like you can't contribute. in the chat at all. Don't feel like you can't bring in something that you come across as I'm reading that fascinates you, that you find interesting, that you find reads very interesting in a certain way, or that troubles you. Um, Maybe not like troubles you in a problematic way, but troubles you in the same way as Van's return home, and how the fire over the romantic quest had died. He had ended his time with romantic fancy. That's a hard line, that not to read but to feel, to surrender to the spark is kind of wild to me. But every time I sit down to read this, it's just a treasure and a treat. And don't feel like you can't participate in this. I value that. Um, if this were a book club that I were creating, we would all be sitting at the table with a copy of the book. We'd be reading it out loud, taking turns, and the minute something came up that was of interest, we could stop and talk about it. That's kind of what I envisioned for this long term. That any book I'm reading, we can stop, we can talk about the cool thing about it, the interesting thing about it, the troubling thing about it, or to explore context and try to work through it. I mean, there's so many of these that will have that. And yeah, it's the journey, not the destination. So with that, I'm going to leave you all. I will see you later. See you in the next video, the next stream, the next social media post, whatever it may be. To quote, well, what was it? I just finished The Good Place. Stay sleazy. No, that's real stupid. But anyways, yeah, I leave you here with that. Enjoy, and I hope to see you next time for more reading of The King of Elfland's Daughter.